Welcome to Textile Update, the podcast where we can share our passion for textiles, fibers, and yarns. This is Gwendolyn Hustvedt. Today, in the 7th podcast of this series, we're going to begin a new topic, which is the first of our natural fiber category, protein fibers. So we're going to start with just what are protein fibers in general, and then we'll dig into something I love, which will probably be in a future short episode, wool. And of course, we'll have to talk about silk as well before we get on to the minor cellulosics. Protein fibers are a really important historical fiber. There are some that say that basically the entirety of the British trading empire was built on the fact that those little islands out there off the coast of Europe could produce really great wool. Or that they took the effort to breed in wool because some of the original wool brought in by the Vikings is not necessarily the softest, right? So wool can take a credit for a lot of things. And then, of course, silk, which was a mystery to Europeans for millennia, but had been totally sorted and created great innovations in China and then Japan. So these two major protein fibers form the core of what is a really exciting topic. I'm going to be honest, wool's my favorite. But let's just start today in this first podcast in this segment on protein fibers by just clearing up, like, what are protein fibers made of? Hint, it's protein. And how does that influence their properties? And we've got the properties on a lock now, right? We've already learned all about things like luster and surface contour and orientation of polymers. And so we can just nail those all down for protein fibers, and then we'll get into the fun of protein fibers in particular. So, as I've hinted at or discussed in previous podcasts about polymers, the protein fibers are special because they're the one group where the polymers are not made out of the same myrrh over and over. It isn't just pearl, 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 right? It's diamond, ruby, sapphire, topaz. And that's because they're made up of polymers composed of amino acids. And amino acids can take a variety of forms. Not a nutrition major, and so I couldn't tell you. Is there 21 or 22? I know it's fewer than the letters of the alphabet. And I know I took L-glutamine one time, and I think L-carnitine. I still haven't resolved that from the previous podcast. So and please don't write in and tell me about it. I actually am not that interested in bodybuilding supplements. But this variety in amino acids means that actually we can have protein fibers that are really pretty dissimilar from each other, because the creature that was creating this fiber, their DNA was coded to use different amino acids. So we can have a fiber like silk, which is lustrous and smooth and translucent, and right next to it we can have the human hair, which is enormous and frankly kind of scratchy, right? A hair shirt isn't called that for nothing. So, this variety that's created by the amino acids is important to consider. We won't get too deep into that, but we'll hit it kind of a little bit as we hit each of the major fibers. Now, there are two big groups that we can talk about, and that's why we'll split this series up into some sub-podcasts, because we've got to talk about animal fibers. I'm going to talk all about wool, and then we'll move on to the minor animal fibers. All of those are staple length. So if it comes from an animal, if it's a mammal, which is where we get the fibers from, then it's going to be staple length. Even the Angora goat, which produces mohair, can only get up to about 18 inches. But the silkworm can extrude a fiber which is miles long, and that fiber is so long it qualifies as a filament. It's actually like the OG filament. It taught us what we know about filaments. We invented manufacturing in order to try and make silk. So the silk fiber is the one fiber that's a filament, unless it's broken or we cut it up, in which case we can make it into shorter lengths, which turns it into staple. Isn't that the fun? That it can kind of be either or. So those are the two big groups that we're going to be talking about: animal fibers and insect-based fibers. So we're not going to talk about spiders very much. We're just not, okay? All right, so when I talk about these categories of fibers, like protein or regenerated cellulosic or synthetic, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a podcast for you where we just talk about the properties of the whole group in general. Yeah, I just told you, like, silk is different than wool because it uses different amino acids. But we can just say some stuff in general about any fiber made from amino acids. And the cool thing about that is we can then kind of predict even if we were to manufacture a fiber from proteins, right? Because we could actually do that. We can make fibers from agricultural waste. We'll get there in a little bit what I'm talking about there. But it will have properties that are similar to, not identical, usually worse than, but similar to the naturally occurring fibers, right? So learning about the properties in general kind of helps us understand what, for example, regenerated protein fiber made from soy protein might perform like. So in general, protein fibers have these advantageous properties. They're very elastic. They have high elasticity. And let's be honest, a good bit of this is because they represent some of the most three-dimensional, the most crimped fibers in existence. We can manufacture fibers to have a crimp, but they're always just the imitators of fibers like wool, which have glorious 3D crimp. Because the amino acids have lots of variety in the surface of the polymers, they'll do a lot of cool cross-linking. We'll talk about that sulfur-sulfur bond when we get down to wool. So that also contributes to the resiliency. So elasticity and resiliency. They are very amorphous, and that means that they have a lot of airy space inside of them because they're just not that organized, right? It's just animal fibers made out of proteins, and these proteins just can't like lay up as tidy as like polymer after polymer after polymer of polyester can. So that means that they're going to be very lightweight in comparison to their size. So they have low density, right? And it's something we love about a fiber like silk, right? That it's actually pretty light and airy. Now we can make something like a wool sweater really bulky, but think about a cashmere sweater, right? Very light, very airy, something we really love about it, that lightweight, low density. And then here is something that is actually really important to understand about protein fibers and the end uses that we use them for. I'm thinking of my little niece and nephew running around the house when they were like 3 or 4 in their Icelandic wool pajamas. And you think like kids in wool pajamas? But yeah, once upon a time, a long time ago, when wool manufacturing was prioritized and people paid good money for good quality wool products, people wore wool as their base layer. Even now, I'm reaching out, I'm touching it right now. Let me pull it down from my closet here. This is a Patagonia wool base layer, and it's very soft. And the reason that I would use that as a base layer on, for example, a transatlantic flight, right? Although here's a silk shirt I might use as a base layer too. It's my little base layer section of the closet. They're both coral, by the way, coral colored. Is because that wool is very absorbent. Wool or protein fibers in general have a moisture regain of between 11 and 18%. Let me explain to you what moisture regain means. We measure moisture regain by forcing fibers to lose as much water as possible. We do that by either heating them up, right, in a low temp oven that basically forces out the moisture because it kind of cooks off. We do that without trying to cook the fiber because we don't want it to lose weight from being cooked. We just want it to sweat off any moisture. Or we might put it in a container with what are called desiccating salts, and you find little packets of those desiccating salts in the bottom of vitamins or in baggies of electronics, right? So if we pack a bunch of those around a fiber, the salts will suck all the moisture out of the fiber because the salts are really thirsty and greedy and want the moisture for itself. And then we will weigh the fiber in that desiccated state. And so we'll say, oh, look, it weighs X number of ounces, right? Then we set it in a humidity and temperature controlled room. And by controlled, I mean it is exactly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 65% relative humidity. plus or minus 2 degrees Fahrenheit and plus or minus 2 percentage points of relative humidity. That's like the national standard for the conditioning chamber. So we put the fiber out in the conditioning chamber for exactly 24 hours, and we let it soak up as much humidity as it wants from that 65% humidity environment. And then at exactly 24 hours, since we weighed it the first time, we weigh it again, and we see how much moisture it regained. And that percentage, right, of its own weight that it regains is the moisture regain. And of course, if we think about human beings as terrible as would be like weighing before and after, your freshman 15, but moisture regain, right? 18% would be if somebody weighed 200 pounds before, at the end of their fabulous desiccating diet, and then after it weighed them again, let's see, 18 times 2, 36, right? They weighed 236 pounds, right? So that would be the regain. So we can do this with fibers, and we see that actually certain fibers in the protein category have the highest moisture regain of any fibers out there. This is important because it gives the fibers a property that we call hygroscopicity. They're hygroscopic. Now, H-Y-G-R-O, not H-Y-D-R-O. Hydro, right? We've heard of hydrophobic. That means something that's afraid of water. And there are fibers that are hydrophobic. Like literally they use chemistry to repel fibers from their surface. And there are fibers that are hydrophilic, like cotton, rayon, hydrophilic. They love water. They'll soak it right up. They have receptors on the surface of those polymers that are no enemy to water. Move right on in, be cozy. But the structure of fibers like wool with the little cuticles on the surface, little scales that can open and allow water to penetrate into the surface of the fiber, down into the actual structure of the fiber in between the polymers. But then this cuticle surface, this cuticle layer, is basically like shingles or like a skin. And that means that when we touch the fiber, we can't actually make contact with the moisture. The moisture is locked away inside the fiber. So I want you to think about this. You've got 3 choices for socks for your cross the desert hiking trip, okay? And you would think like, I'm not wearing wool socks. It's the desert. I'm going to be hot. I'm going to wear cotton socks. Big mistake, because your feet are going to sweat. It's the desert. You're hot. And the sweat from your feet, where's it going to go? It's going to be absorbed into that cotton fiber because the fiber is hydrophilic. It's going to love the moisture, but it's not going to lock it away inside its surface. So your feet are actually going to be sitting in soggy fiber. Your feet are going to get wet and you're going to get blisters. Almost ASAP, right? Now, if you chose the polyester, it is hydrophobic, right? So it's going to repel moisture. That means that the fiber itself won't be wet, but the moisture is still in your shoe, right? So you're still going to be stepping in it, right? Every time you step down, the moisture will pop back through the surface of the polyester fiber and touch your foot. So you're going to get blisters. It won't be ASAP, it'll be after that. But if you put on the wool sock, right, you're actually not going to be any hotter than the temperature of your body, because the wool has thermal retention, which means that it's an insulating layer, right? And we insulate a cooler to keep it cool inside. If we insulate our foot, it will stay the temperature of our body, just like this base layer will, right? When I wear it on the plane, so I'm not cooling any further in the cold plane. And the sweat from my foot will be absorbed into the surface of the fiber, right, down inside, in between the polymers, and then the cuticle will lock closed so that my foot will actually feel like it's gliding across smooth, not wet fibers. So I may never get blisters if I'm wearing wool socks. There's a reason why every soldier that went into the desert in the Middle East, right, was required to wear wool on their feet because it has the best performance. So hydrophobic, hates fibers, that would be like synthetics. Hydrophilic, hates water. Hydrophilic loves water, right? But hygroscopic, the special property of protein fibers, especially wool, where it is not necessarily wet to the touch, right? So it can provide that nice thermal retention and absorbency without actually feeling soggy. Now, I've just mentioned that obviously certain fibers like protein fibers have an amorphous polymer structure that allow them to allow water to actually access the inside of the fiber and have a place to hang out, right? And I've talked about how a fiber like polyester, which is hydrophobic, there isn't any way any water is getting inside that fiber. We'll talk about it in a while, but it's actually a huge challenge to even get dye to get on that fiber, right? Let alone to get the fiber wet. And it's partly why like your yoga pants end up kind of smelly, because they're not actually getting wet in the washing machine, right? The fiber's so hydrophobic. So again, gross town, but we'll go there later. So fibers that are hydrophobic repel moisture on their surface. This is a chance for me to introduce another property that's called wicking. I use little air quotes there, wicking, right? And wicking is what synthetic fibers brag about because they can't brag about absorbency. And wicking is the fact that the hydrophobic fibers basically form sort of a reverse capillary tube. They hate moisture so much that any vapor on the surface of your skin, right, that condenses into liquid on the synthetic fibers will actually be sucked through the textile and arrive on the other side, right? Because the fibers like get along, it gets out to the outside air where the vapor pressure is lower, right? And the fiber then evaporates. So it actually does help make you drier. It's doing it not by absorbing the moisture, it's doing it by wicking the moisture through the fiber, through the fabric, and then allowing it to evaporate on the other side. And that's why we see this type of material used as performance-based layers for athletes, right? The athletes are not necessarily worried about like long-term core temperature management, like somebody on a flight or a climber would be, where they would go for silk or the protein fibers as base layers, right? Because they need that additional thermal retention. This would be people who want to do their workout and they're doing it in an air-conditioned room, right? So they just want to help get their sweat away from their body to allow them to remain a bit more comfortable during the workout. So that is what happens with those hydrophobic fibers, that wicking. Had to explain it sometime. I could have waited until later, but as long as I was all into your pores, I might as well get it done now. All right, so we've talked about the great things about protein fibers. Let me lay down some of the weaknesses because yeah, they're not perfect. They're so amorphous, all right? And then that absorbency, it has a downside. They have very low tenacity. You could pull a hair fiber off of your head right now. It might take a little bit of trouble, right? Depending on how strong your hair is. And this would depend on the amino acids your body was using to make the hair in part, right? So your diet does play a role in that. But if you try to pull your hair apart, you would manage to snap a single hair fiber with your bare hands. And nobody would be like, ooh, look how strong she is, right? When the fibers get wet, they're even weaker. You know you're not supposed to brush your wet hair, right? Because if your hair is susceptible to breaking when it's wet, those water molecules are in there between the polymers, kind of distracting them. And so the polymers are like not even really thinking about each other anymore. And if a brush comes along and pulls on one part of the polymers, they won't even notice like that they're being separated from their friends. It's like if a gang of skeezy people shows up at your party and it's like in between you and all your friends. And after a while you're like, whoa, did I just spend like 20 minutes talking to this skeezy person? Where are my friends, right? So not that water is skeezy, we love water, right? It does a lot of great stuff for us in textiles, but in this case, you put your protein fibers into a washing machine, they're going to get damaged. So that's why we want to treat wet protein fibers with the same gentleness that we would treat our own wet hair. The reason why a lot of protein fibers are marked dry clean, okay? Which means that dry cleaning is the preferred option or a good option. Dry clean only means that they will not be responsible if you don't dry clean it. But things that just say dry clean, they're suggesting that the dry cleaning, which the molecules of the solvent in dry cleaning don't penetrate the fiber. They don't hang out. They don't act like water inside the polymer, right? So they don't weaken the fiber. And they're suggesting that you may not be prepared. You may not be prepared to launder the item in the gentle way that it needs. But, I have some silk cashmere sweater sets that I wash by hand in the sink using baby shampoo. I pat them gently with a towel. I don't wring them, right? I treat them like I would treat baby hair, right? Very gently. I don't rub the surface briskly with a towel, right? I pat it. And so I try to prevent the breakage from the weakness. I don't want to rub the surface because the fibers in that moist state, or just in general, the protein fibers can break with abrasion, right? So if you rubbed a spot on your head after a while, then hairs would break off. Dimensional stability is a big issue with protein fibers. They aren't very dimensionally stable. They can shrink. Some of this is due to the progressive shrinkage created by swelling over and over. We'll talk about this in a while, progressive shrinkage. But some of it is due to felting. I have a whole video about felting on my Textile Update YouTube channel. Go there, listen to that lady, online Dr. Husfat, talk about felting, because she's got a lock on it. Ooh, that was a little felting pun. But at any rate, the fact that it can felt, wool especially, means that we want to be very careful as well about abrasion, hot water, because those are things that can activate the felting properties. Let's see, another weakness of protein fibers is that, just like us, human beings who are made out of protein, we are vulnerable to damage from UV radiation, right? Sunburn is just the symptom that your body is in great distress, right? The damage to your DNA is done whether you get a sunburn or not, right? Whether you ever see freckles or not, your DNA can be damaged. And then depending on your genetic predisposition, you can end up with skin cancer. Well, textiles, that DNA, they're so your protein fibers are not made of DNA, but DNA is a polymer, protein fiber polymer. The bonds in that polymer can be broken by radiation. The radiation is a powerful force that can actually separate the bonds in the polymer, making it even weaker. This is the reason why we don't leave silk drapery exposed to sunlight in the windows. We wouldn't put a beautiful wool carpet right in the full sun, because it will actually damage and weaken the fibers, not just fade the dyes. Let's see, what else? So things like acids, right? Just like we would be damaged, we're made out of protein, we'd be damaged by, like, think about the things you wouldn't like, right? You wouldn't like a really dry heat. It would dry you out, right? And you don't want to use an iron on your hair for too long. It will actually damage it, right? In the same way, we don't iron protein fibers with a hot, dry iron. We have to pay attention to the chemistry of certain things, right? So, for example, some people have perspiration that's pretty salty, and then add in things like deodorants. Some of the chemicals there kind of combine to make an alkali situation, and that can damage the protein fibers. Actually, a really big enemy is bleach. We use bleach to prove that something is a protein fiber, right? We don't use chlorine bleach on our hair, right, to bleach our hair. We use peroxide bleach, but it still damages your hair, right? When you bleach your hair, it's weaker, it's more fragile, it breaks. You have to be careful with it. If we put protein fibers into a chlorine bleach solution, we'll actually see bubbles of oxygen being released as the bleach begins to oxidize the polymer. And that will tell us, oh, bingo, that's a protein fiber. It's not acrylic, it's not polyester, because those don't react to chlorine that way. And let's see, another thing, they're vulnerable to insects. I know I'm vulnerable to insects. Fire ant bites, oh my goodness. I am so allergic to fire ants by now. My feet will swell up so huge I can barely put my shoe on. I have to run right to the bathroom, scrub my foot with Borax to try to use the alkali to scrub off the top layer of my skin and get that venom out, right? In the case of protein fibers, there are insects such as carpet beetles or clothes moths that will eat the fibers, the protein. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. They don't enjoy this protein. It's not like it's tasty. It's not like they're looking for it. They actually smell the spaghetti sauce or the salad dressing or the leftover cheese sauce that's on the textile, right? Like a carpet under a dining table. And they start eating those first. But then, they just keep going, because technically the wool or the silk or whatever is technically edible, right? So the best way to avoid issues with insects eating your protein fibers is to make sure you put them away clean so that insects aren't even like tempted by them, right? Because they don't like open the door to your closet and go, whoa, buffet in there, right? So getting things properly clean, spot cleaning really carefully to remove any kind of food stains, that's the way to prevent problems with insects in your protein fiber textiles. All right, so I've kind of told you the good, the bad, the ugly. All right, the ugly would be the wool felting. That's actually the most ugly situation. So ugly, I made a whole separate video about it. So hopefully that's a good introduction to what's up with protein fibers.